Why, hello everyone. This is Classic Homesteading Practices, and today we're going to be talking about beekeeping. Now, beekeeping is something that I've personally been romanticizing and have fallen in love with for a very long time. And I think the biggest reason is because, of course, the taste of it. As a kid, I always loved being able to go to our fair in Alaska. It is called a bear paw, and then we have a state fair, and there was a booth that had over 50 different flavors of honey. And, as a kid, you don't realize that some of them are infused with different flavors, like, the green apple honey or the grape or raspberry honey. You think that, oh my gosh, how do the bees do this? And then, you grow up, you learn a bit more, and you find out, well, of course, they weren't able to make those flavors, but there were, in fact, some flavors that bees were able to make. And then you find out, oh my gosh, honey goes into everything if you want to. I mean, cookies, cakes, tea, especially tea for me. You can have it by itself. You can have it as a chewing gum, which is when you do a honeycomb honey, and we'll talk about that later. You can also just do so much with honeybees, along with the fact that you are helping a population of honeybees, which has been slowly going the way of the dinosaur for a while. And just trying to help the population of getting beekeeping back up is a personal vendetta that I hope to be a part of one day, because I couldn't believe it when I was 15 when I heard that bees were going extinct. They were dropping en masse because of pesticides and other things that have been killing off bees for many decades now. We've been doing better as people, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and beekeeping can actually help with getting the population back up. So, if you are interested in beekeeping for any reason, this is my information for you. So, let's start with infrastructure. How are you going to house your bees? And a very nice and simple way of putting it is you get a beehive. Now, what are the parts of a beehive? Usually what I've personally seen are these boxes. And they're usually about 10 inches to 15 inches in width by 12 inches or 20 inches in length. And the height is usually about a foot high. And these are wooden boxes. Usually they have been glued together, or they have a dovetail or a hinge joint that they've been put the wood pieces together. They are not usually nailed, but they are a very sturdy box. And inside them are about 8 to 10 frames, which holds the honeycomb that the bees will be putting on it, and eventually the honey. Now, depending if you get a bee kit, a bee box kit, you can choose the size and how many frames that you want. So, like I said before, it can be a 8-frame box or a 10-frame box. You can have a beehive that's only one box big, which I definitely say at least get 2 if you're going to do a beehive. And there's a reason for that. And I've seen them ranging as big as 6 to 8 boxes high. And that's just one beehive. Now, you want to do a beehive for every bee colony that you get, which means that sometimes you're going to see a person who does bees that has, 6 boxes in one place, 3 boxes in another place, and they're all stacked on top of each other. So you have 3 boxes high stacked over here, 6 boxes stacked over there. And those are separate beehives. They are not the same. They do not go back and forth from each other, usually. And what is happening is these bees, whether they are the same species or a different one, are collecting honey for their hive. And the reason why I said earlier you want to do at least a 2-box system is because your bees have a system. They have a place where their queen and the worker bees and their babies live in that beehive. And then there's a separate place where they stick the honey, as long as it's large enough. Now, if it is crowded and there's only one box, you can have a big problem because they start sharing space where they're putting bee grubs or bee babies in the same places as their honey. So when you go and collect your frames, you might be collecting bee grubs as well, which can harm your beehive in the long run. So just something to keep in mind if you ever decide, oh, I only have enough money for one beehive box. Please just go ahead and wait and at least get 2 boxes. I personally want to do a 3-box hive, if not a 4, mainly because I have seen from a friend the best system that I personally love, and it's where the bees are on the very bottom, and yes, they will figure this out for themselves. And they have their worker bees, their queens, and most of their little grubkins on the bottom box. That is where they personally live. And then the second box is where they keep their bee bread, their pollen poultices, and their honey for their hive in the second box. And then the third box you reserve for yourself, for all the honey that you're going to be collecting. And it's a lot easier on the bees and for you because you have this entire box full of 8 to 10 frames of honey just for you and your family. So the next question, after you've figured out, how many boxes you want, is what kind of bees do you want? Now in America, I have mostly seen the name Western American bees used as a blanket statement for the different kind of bees that are used. But there are many different kinds of bees in that subcategory. A couple of them are Russians or Russian bees. Others are Camellios and Italians. I know that there have been hybrids, so different breeding amongst those breeds. There are also even rare, fun species like a blue honeybee, which apparently has a beautiful blue tinting, and so on and so forth. I've even seen purple honeybees, which is a really interesting one. But the thing to note is that doesn't change the honey just because you have a different species. The honey is going to be the same. The production might be a bit different. The rate of growth in the hive might be different, but not the taste. And the reason being is because the honey, the taste, is going to be made by the food that they eat. So what is their food? Which is a very nice and simple thing. It is flower products. So pollen, nectar. That's usually what they go and eat and give back to the hive so that they can make honey. Now, bees don't only make honey. That is something else to just lay out there. So when you see something that is a little bit different, you know that, hey, something's wrong here. No, it's not. It's okay. It's probably just bee bread. Or it's, again, a fun yellow substance that's a little bit thicker. You will be seeing it all over the box where there are any kind of open space that isn't the entrance door. It's a pollen poultice or a bee glue, which is made from pollen and saliva from the bees to waterproof and just keep anything out from the outside coming in. You will see that around or inside the bee boxes. So don't be worried about that. But just to give you a reference of things that are going on inside of the hive and that are being made besides honey, bees do make different things besides honey. Bee bread is made to feed little grubs and the queen. There's also royal jelly, which is made specifically to feed the queen. It is a very nutritious substance that helps her to breed easier, to lay eggs and larvae easier, and keep her healthy. And then, of course, there is honey, which the bees do eat. But it's mainly a source of nutrition that keeps them going, and it's a nice, quick carb, sugar product to keep them on energy and just to keep them going. So multiple things are going to be happening in this hive. All right. So I've told you about the different kinds that you can get and also a little bit of the food that they have. Now, it's not only pollen and nectar that they can eat. You can also bring in a supplemental food, which I would strongly recommend, and I will be doing when I get my hive for the first time. And the reason being is because when you have a hive coming to you for the first time, being able to give them easy access to food is the best way to help them get a fresh start, to just pick them up by their little bee bootstraps and get them going as quickly as possible to start the hive. And that is sugar water. Now, there are people who say that you shouldn't be giving them sugar water. It messes with the flavor of the honey. It makes the bees codependent on it, which is not true. I have asked, I have checked, I have done research. If you take away sugar water, your hive will not die. If it is gone, as long as they have a good food supply around them. And it does not truly change the flavor of honey as long as it's just a supplemental food. And again, if you're doing this as a pick-me-up, as the beginning of their food, when they first get into a hive, you're not going to be seeing a difference in the honey because they're not going to be making honey first. They're going to be setting up their combs, they're going to be setting up their breeding area, they're going to be making bee bread. Honey is not going to be a part of a bee's process until they have their home situation figured out. And then honey will come later, especially for you. So don't be concerned about giving them sugar water to prop them up for their first, stint of being at your homestead. Now, there are other supplemental foods. I personally have not looked into them very much, but they are part of the beekeeping kits. If you decide to get one of those online, I would do research into them beforehand, just because, one, I'm not giving you all the information, and two, of course, everybody's going to have an opinion. Everybody has a belief when they are making the products, but it doesn't mean that you need to get them. Also, another fun thing when it comes to food for your bees, when they start finding flowers, when they start collecting pollen, eating nectar around your surrounding area, depending on the season, you're going to have different honey. The flavors, the color are going to change. And this is one of the most amazing things about beekeeping that I have seen and love. And the reason for that is because of the different kinds of plants that your bees are going to be eating from. So, for instance, in Alaska, clovers come in about mid to late summer, and then fireweed comes in late summer to fall. And in that time period, you have this beautiful look at what your bees have been eating just by the different plants that they've had. So if you crack open your bee box, which I will tell you how to do in a minute. But if you crack open your bee box and you look at the frames, some of the frames are going to have a golden dark brown honey, and that is the honey from the clovers. While on the other frames, you will see this beautiful golden yellow honey from fireweed. And the most amazing thing about these both is that not only has the color changed, but the flavor has changed as well. You have a deep, wonderful flavor from the clovers, while there is a more light, a more sugary taste from the fireweed. Now, there have been people who love to also infuse different flavors to help bring out the flavor that is naturally made in the honey. That is what people did at the fair that I was telling you about in the beginning, where they would take a fireweed syrup and they would mix it with the honey, and not only could you taste the flavors, the undernotes of the fireweed from it, but of course you're also going to taste that fireweed syrup and it's going to smack you in the face. So that's the fun thing about messing around with syrups with honey, but also letting your bees choose the different kind of flowers. Or you can also do a setup where you have a garden specifically made for your bees. So flowers that your bees are going to like are calendula, daisies, heavy pollinators, something that you're going to look at and you can see the yellow pollen just floating away on these flowers in a nice breeze. And I've had people swear by lavender, lemongrass, and other flowers that those are some of the best for honeybees. And what I will say is there have been a lot of people who attest to their own flowers. So before you decide to have bees as well, I would suggest looking into the kind of honey that you would like to make or have with your bees. So go ahead and check out what kind of flowers you'd like. See when they bloom during the spring, the summer, or the fall. Or if you're a year-round person, which people in the South, I envy you, go ahead and also choose flowers that you know will be good for wintertime pollinating. Because for people like that, you guys don't have to worry about wintering your bees over. You can just let them do their thing and you get honey year-round. But for the rest of you, go ahead, check it out, and see what the different flavors or the different colors that you can get from your honey. All right. So going away from food, now you've fed your bees, which means that they are now producing honey. But you need, before you crack in there and go all Pooh Bear and get all the honey, you need to have the gear. And what does that mean? So you're going into a bee's home and taking their honey. They're not going to be happy with this. So you're going to need protective gear. You're going to need a way to subdue them. You're also going to need a way to pry open the box itself because of all that sticky bee glue that I was telling you about earlier, which is going to be all over the top of the box and in between every frame. So you're going to have to take it apart. Also, you're going to need a way to cut open the comb. It's called decapping. I'll tell you why in a little bit, to get the honey out. And then after all of that, you need to make sure you have a bucket and a strainer so you don't have little chunkies in your honey because comb is going to try and come in with your honey and you're going to need to strain it all out. So, first off is a bee suit. Now, I'm talking about full coverage, and the reason why is because I've seen many horror stories about people going over with just a smoker and a hat and their leggings, and they were not They were not able to get away from the bees fast enough once they found out that bees get very aggressive very quickly, even if you've smoked them a little bit uh, and you don't have the proper gear on. One false move, and you're going to have a lot of bee stings. So go ahead and just get the gear, even on the off chance that, bees aren't subdued as quickly as you want to when you smoke them. And that means getting the face covering, getting the full suit, getting the gloves, and also making sure that you have good heavy boots. Now, it's not as expensive as I'm probably making it sound. On Amazon, you can go ahead and get a bee suit for about $35, and that's including the mask, gloves, suit. And then, of course, it goes all the way down and covers your ankles, as long as you get the proper size for yourself, of course. And then you're going to have to just make sure that you're wearing good shoes when you do it. And I personally would go for a nice thick boot. Yes, in the summertime, your feet are going to stink and sweat, but it's better than having it's better than having stung feet at the end of it. So that is my recommendation. You're going to need a crowbar. I would recommend at least a 18-inch crowbar so you can pry your box frame, the top off, and then, of course, the frames inside apart from each other. You're going to need a little smoker, which is a tin can with a spout on the side and a little puffer that you start a fire in. And you can puff the smoke from that fire that you made in the tin can onto the bees, and that will subdue the bees. It doesn't make them fall asleep, which is what a lot of people say. It just makes them become more lethargic or subdued. I like the word subdued because it just means that the bees stay there and they don't move around very much. They will let you brush them off of the area. They will fly. Don't worry about knocking them off and to their doom or anything. It's not that crazy. But they will let you just wipe them off the side, get them out of the way so you can grab the frames. After you would grab the frames to bring them inside, you're going to need a decapping knife, which kind of looks like a spatula, but it's very thin and long. It's usually the length of the width of the frame. And what I do personally, and what I've also seen friends do, is heat up the knife under some hot water before going over and decapping, because I forgot to tell you what decapping is for. So when the bees have fully filled the comb, they put a little wax cap on the top of the comb. And if they have filled every square inch of that frame up, you will have this beautiful white or dark brown capped honeycomb. And it's gorgeous. But because that has been done, you are going to need to take your decapping knife and slice the very top of that wax off so you can get to the honey. Now, it is very easy to press or pry apart with your hands and fingers and stuff, but I definitely recommend being able to just get a decapping knife so you can slowly or with time quickly just scrape off that top bit of wax. And then you can start taking the honey out. Now, after you've decapped it, make sure you've propped it on its side. You go down at you would have the knife at a scraping angle about 45 degrees, and you would scrape all the way down. Now, the honey is going to ooze out pretty quickly at the beginning because it is full. Make sure it's underneath of a bucket. So make sure to have your frame underneath of a bucket, because as soon as you get that cap off, it's just going to flow. Now, expect a good amount of honey, but probably not as much as you were thinking in your head at first, so don't have too high of expectations for the first for the first time that you get honey. Because again, if this is a new colony, it's going to be a little bit slow at first. Once they get more workers, more honey is going to be made. But just understand that the first harvest isn't going to be the biggest harvest, especially when summer comes around and there's a humongous boom of flowers and the pollen season comes in. You will have way more honey on your hands than you ever thought. But make sure that you have the frame properly propped up over a bucket. Let it drain out. This will take some time because honey is a viscous material or it's a thick material, and draining it all out will probably take about 10-15 minutes per frame. Sometimes it takes a lot less time. I've seen people drain it in about 5 minutes. I don't know how they do it, but it's amazing to watch. Unless you are a person who's deciding to do one of two things. You have better equipment than just basic buckets or bowls, and you have the money to spend on equipment that spins the honeycomb and honey around and separates it that way. Then you will cut the honeycomb out of the frame. You will stick it into that little spinner and you will let it separate on its own. Or you even have more money than that and you will have a frame spinner, which is the same thing, but you don't cut the honeycomb out. You stick your individual frames into a slot in a giant bucket spinner, and then you put the cap on top, and you set the timer for about 30 minutes, I believe, was the timing for it. And it will spin the honey out of the honeycomb in the frames. It'll all drain down into a bucket below, and then you can take your frames and either cut the honeycomb out or you will leave the honeycomb in, put the frames back in to your beehive, and you will let your bees just re-go through the process. And you will go ahead and take your honey that you have now put into this giant bucket and you will start straining it. Now, I have a lot of people who just go ahead and use a fine mesh metal. I've heard honey snobs say that you don't do that. You use a cheesecloth over a bowl so the metal doesn't taint the honey. I've never had that problem. That I have never tasted a metallic taste using a metal strainer. But after you've strained all of the chunks or anything that may have gotten into the honey while you were decapping and draining the frames, you take it over and you do one of two things. You will then put it into your lovely handy mason jar and you will cap it off and you will store it, or you will pasteurize it, which means that you will boil your honey for a length of time in order to make sure that there is nothing that is getting in or out bacterial wise, and then you will can it. Now, the reason why a lot of people do not can or pasteurize then can is because people have said that there's less flavor or it's just not necessary. I personally, because it is for home use, I have always just bought raw honey. But for people who have decided that they want to sell it on a business level, are required to pasteurize it depending on the area that they are at. Though personally, if you are doing this at home and you are not concerned, like I am, go ahead and just leave it raw. Always date, and also make sure that the shelving timeline is right for your honey. Honey, just like everything else, does have a shelf life. From what I was told, I believe it is 6 months to a year if it is raw. If it is pasteurized, I believe it's up to 2 years. But please, again, check to make sure, because every situation is different. All right. I've told you about the beehives themselves, the bees, feeding the bees, how to collect it, and the gear that you will need. I think that is all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I hope this was helpful in your endeavor to becoming a beekeeper. I hope that everyone is doing well in this new year of 2021, and I will see you later. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.